Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 6:06. It's O'Connor and Company here Wednesday. It's Wednesday. Hello, it's Wednesday. Caught myself. Julie, you're supposed to correct me on,
I know. I'm sorry. I was late.
I need you on the fly there.
I'm just taking a sip of coffee.
6:35, Cal Thomas will be here. 7:05, Tim Hobart on the Memorial Day Parade coming up. 7:35, Jeffrey Trimbath, president of Maryland Family Institute. And 8:05, Hans von Spakovsky, an election law expert. It's Larry O'Connor alongside Julie Gunlock. Morning, Julie.
Good morning.
You know, if you're being prosecuted for a crime, you want to make sure that you can bring expert lawyers up, or experts in any field, really, to sort of bring their expertise to the table so that the jury can understand whether you, in fact, did break the law or not.
Is that how it works, Larry?
It's how it's supposed to work, I would think. For instance, if you were being prosecuted for violating an election law, I would ask Hans von Spakovsky to be there. He literally is an expert on election law. He worked in the Justice Department, in the Civil Rights Division, specifically focused on elections and voting and all the laws pertaining to it, right? Be a great example. Or, for instance, Bradley Smith. Bradley Smith used to sit as a commissioner on the Federal Elections Commission. Right? It's like, you want to know about federal law, you bring in someone who sits on the Federal Elections Commission to sort of break things down.
Smart.
That's what the Trump defense team was thinking. Because, of course, you know, just to reiterate, I know we have a very educated audience that knows these things. This is not like CNN or MSNBC, where their viewers literally think that Donald Trump is being prosecuted for having an affair. Which they haven't even proven that in court, by the way. Right. They haven't even proven that. The so-called hush money, which is a legal payment to Stormy Daniels in exchange for her sworn affidavit and a non-disclosure agreement. It was paid for Michael Cohen, the thieving liar star witness for the prosecution. And then Donald Trump's organization paid Michael Cohen his legal fee, and he accounted for it as a legal fee on his on the ledgers. And the Manhattan District Attorney is claiming that by falsifying the financial record and calling it a legal fee instead of hush money, which, by the way, there is no category for hush money because it isn't hush money.
Right.
But by calling it a legal fee, that was falsifying a financial record. And by the way, that's a misdemeanor in Manhattan, and the statute of limitations had already played out for that. But, you see, the only way Alvin Bragg was able to lie to a grand jury and bring these charges now during an election year against Donald Trump is to say that the falsifying of the financial record was to cover up a different crime. Right. And on the New York law books, if that's the case, then you can make it a felony. And the different crime that they claim he was covering up was a violation of election law.
Got it.
Okay? Everyone got that? That's why an election lawyer and an election expert would be critical here.
Yes.
Pretty important.
Yes.
So, by the way, and here's the problem with federal election law. They're claiming that the violation here was that he used his personal finances for this when it was clearly meant to help his campaign. Mm-hmm. And yet, when they tried to prosecute former Senator John Edwards for the exact same thing, he paid a non-disclosure agreement to the photographer that he was having an affair with and actually fathered a baby with. That would be the Democrat senator from North Carolina that the Democrats wanted to be vice president of the United States. While his wife was dying of cancer, he had an affair with a photographer and impregnated her and denied it, okay? Yeah. And he paid her with campaign finances, with money from his campaign.
Money. Yep.
Right, which was a violation of federal election law. Mm-hmm. If you use your campaign funds for that sort of thing, that's a violation of federal election laws, and they tried to prosecute him for that.
So one would use personal funds.
But they're trying to prosecute Trump for using personal funds because they're claiming he should have used as campaign funds. So you see why this might be confusing. It seems like if you use campaign funds, they will prosecute you. And if you don't use campaign funds, they will prosecute you. Right? That's sort of what it seems. Mm-hmm. And this is why having an expert to discuss these laws would be valuable.
Yes, it would.
Because if you're the jury and you're trying to decide if this man is guilty of breaking the law, maybe you should have somebody explain the law.
Yeah.
If it's written in such a way that you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. By the way, that is why at 8:05 we will, in fact, talk to an election law expert,
Yes.
Hans von Spakovsky. Which brings us back to Manhattan, because Donald Trump had two witnesses. Michael Cohen's former lawyer, who says Michael Cohen will lie about anything to get Donald Trump and to save his own sorry butt and make money. The judge got into a screaming match with him when he was testifying.
Are you staring me down?
Yes. And now the second witness is Bradley Smith, former commissioner for the Federal Elections Commission, to testify about as an expert on election law. Yeah. And the judge will not even allow, forget about getting into a shouting match with him. He won't even allow him to take the stand. But this is a completely and totally legitimate prosecution of Donald Trump, and nobody has a right to criticize the judge.
Trump had two witnesses, just two. Yep. One, again, to talk about Michael Cohen's character and the ease with which he lies, which we already know that, but still. And then an election. There only two. And Judge Merchan said no to one of them. Just astonishing.
So that's where we stand now.
The fix is in.
Mr. Smith told the Washington Examiner on Monday, judges instruct the juries on the law. They don't want a battle of competing experts saying, here's what the law is. They feel it's their province to make that determination. The problem, of course, is the campaign finance law is extremely complex, and just reading the statute to people isn't really going to help them very much. And I would add to that, federal election law is, by definition, if you heard it, it's right there in the description, it's right there in the name, it's a federal law. This judge in Manhattan is not a federal judge. He never deals with this stuff. Smith said he anticipated to lay out the ways the law has been interpreted in ways that might not be obvious, while noting election laws are very complicated matters. He said, you read the law and it says that anything intended for the purpose of influencing an election is a contribution or an expenditure, but that's not in fact the entirety of the law. There is the obscure and separate from the definitional part idea of personal use, which is a separate part of the law that says you can't divert campaign funds to personal use. That has a number of specific prohibitions, like you can't buy a country club membership, you can't normally pay yourself a salary or living expenses, you can't go on vacation, all these kinds of things. And it includes a broader general prohibition that says you can't divert campaign funds to any obligation that would exist even if you were not running for office. We would have liked to flag that exception for the jury and talk a little bit about what it means. And the judge said no.
Well.
And again, and he wasn't on there to say, I'm an expert and I'm telling you Donald Trump didn't violate the law. He wasn't going to say that.
No, he's just, explaining a very complex law. By the way, I hope some Loudoun County politicians are listening to this.
Oh, about the misuse of funds and campaign funds? Yeah.
No.
Well, that's tax dollars, though. That's totally, you can do anything with that.
Yeah, exactly. Back to this issue. The fix is in. I mean, of course they don't want this. This is critical for the jury to understand the difference in this. Yeah. And that's exactly why the judge doesn't want this information going to the jury. Is today when the jury, are they done today? Is this when?
I think that there's a rebuttal time now for the prosecution. They can come up and rebut whatever the defense has said, stuff like that. By the way, Mr. Smith, and so I've seen this on cable news where they said, this Smith guy from the FEC, well, he's a Trump lackey. He served as an FEC commissioner between 2000 and 2005.
Yeah,
when Donald Trump was a Democrat. All right, so stop.
Wow.
Also of interest. So we got to jump. All right. Oh, we've got more on this. All right, a little bit more on this because there are other things that this guy wasn't going to say that he certainly could have said in his capacity as an expert, and I'll share that with you in a moment. It is 6:15 WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes. First on the 5s. Jamie Whitten in the Hadid Carpet Cleaning Traffic Center.
Weeknights with Mark Levin, 6 to 9 p.m.
On News Talk 105.9 WMAL, making sense of the news.
Judge Juan Merchan has ruled that Mr. Smith, Bradley Smith, former commissioner of the FEC from 2000 to 2005, could speak in front of the jury on basic definitions surrounding election law, but that's it and not expand beyond it. You see, there was going to be a question that Trump's lawyers were going to ask that Judge Merchan does not want the jury to hear. Well, they're fine hearing the question. He didn't want them to hear the answer. The question was going to be, federal election law is a federal issue, and it's our understanding that your former body, the FEC, Federal Elections Commission, as well as the Federal Justice Department, looked at this case and they decided not to bring charges. Can you explain why that conclusion was reached? Of course, but that's a fact.
Yeah.
That is a fact that the judge does not want the jury. So, former FEC Commissioner Smith, if I mind, do you mind if I read through this?
Of course.
Because he took to Twitter after this decision, and he laid out, and again, this guy is not, there's no MAGA hat on this guy, man.
Right,
Honestly, his vibe, he's a lawyer. I've seen him on Life, Liberty, and Levin, but his vibe is kind of, almost
just really
never Trumpy. He's
kind
of he's a bushy. He's
and really quickly before you read this, most judges are concerned about, is this grounds for appeal? Like, they want the court proceedings to be, by the book so that the ruling can't, he's doing everything wrong here. He's giving every reason for this to be, whatever happens.
No, this judge doesn't care about it.
I know.
Because the appeal will happen after the election.
Right.
That's not his priority.
I know.
Yeah. All right, so here's what Mr. Smith said on Twitter. Bragg's theory, that would be the prosecutor Alvin Bragg, hinges on the claim that Trump tried to influence an election through unlawful means. To do that, he'll have to show that Trump violated the Federal Election Campaign Act. But since neither the FEC nor DOJ sued Trump, he's got to show it on his own evidence. If that's the case, it's not entirely relevant. If that's the case, isn't it entirely relevant, not dispositive, but relevant to the jury's fact-finding on that question that neither the DOJ nor the FEC chose to prosecute? Judge Merchan won't allow it in. He will, though, allow in numerous references to Michael Cohen's guilty plea and allow Cohen to testify as to how he thinks he and Trump violated FEC. Think about that for a minute. They're letting the judge let Michael Cohen speculate about how he thinks he violated federal election law. Mm-hmm. This is the guy who is a thieving liar,
a convicted felon.
Tell us, Mr. Cohen, the lawyer who secretly taped his client and stole from
money.
His client.
Yeah.
Tell us your legal expertise about how you think you violated this law.
Right.
We don't want to hear from the guy who sat on the Elections Commission who basically enforced the law at the federal level for 5 years. No. We want Michael Cohen, the rat's impression of it. Right. It appears that Cohen is Bradley Smith continues. It appears that Cohen is a dunce about campaign finance laws. This, he admonishes the jury, is solely for context. Right. Mm. And so he says, and others have, commented on this and recognized that Judge Merchan has completely restricted any sort of fact-finding about the law for the judge. So the jury is not going to have facts. The jury is not going to, they still might end up a hung jury, but this is absolutely outrageous. And you're right, completely grounds for an appeal if he gets convicted.
Yeah. It's grounds for a dismissal, frankly. So much of this is disturbing, but this really leaving the jury uneducated. It's something I didn't see coming.
And let me just be clear, because he then when it was denied, when the defense said, there's no reason to call you, Bradley, because of what this judge has done.
He's so restricted. Yeah.
He took to Twitter. He said, it's elementary that the judge instructs the jury on the law, so I understand his reluctance. But the Federal Election Campaign Act is very complex. Even Justice Antonin Scalia, a pretty smart guy, even if you hate him, once said, quote, "This campaign finance law is so intricate that I can't figure it out." So now picture a jury in a product liability case trying to figure out if a complex machine was negligently designed based only on a boilerplate recitation of the general definition of negligence. They'd be lost without knowing technology and industry norms. Someone has to bring that knowledge to the jury. That not the law was my intended testimony. For example, part of the state's case is that they wrongly reported what they knew to be a campaign expenditure in order to hide the payment until after the election. Cohen even testified they just wanted to get past the election. So we're going to go over the reporting schedule showing that even if they thought it was a campaign expenditure to be reported, an expenditure, so we're going to show even, oh gosh, he lost his thread. An expenditure made on October 27th would not, under law, be reported until December 8th.
A full
30 days after the
yeah,
election. So, in other words, let me just make this clear, because we talked about it the other day, that the reporting to the Federal Election Commission didn't happen until after the election. So even if numbskull Michael Cohen thought he was violating the law, he wasn't violating the law. Even if Michael Cohen's secret master plan was to violate election law, because the reporting happened after the election, he actually wasn't violating the law. And Mr. Smith would have laid that out, because that's what the FEC determined. That's what the Justice Department determined. But this judge won't allow that in there.
It's interesting. He concludes, he says, so you've got a judge who contributed to Trump's opponent presiding over a trial by a prosecutor who was elected on a vow to get Trump for something DOJ and FEC chose not to prosecute on a far-fetched legal theory, which the prosecution has been allowed to repeatedly misstate the law or elicit incorrect statements of the law from witnesses. And unlike Cohen's, my testimony would not have gone to the ultimate legal issue. The judge's bias is very evident.
Yep. So there you go. That's the latest out of Manhattan. And I doubt you heard any of that exposition anywhere else in the media. So like you, I am very glad that you tune into O'Connor and Company so you can have it all laid out like this. It's absolutely outrageous. Hans von Spakovsky, who also would have been a great witness on this, but understandably probably a little bit more biased since he actually was on a commission appointed by Donald Trump, he will be joining us at 8:05 to get into this in more detail. Right now, though, Juliet.
Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
6:36 here this Wednesday morning. Thanks for joining us. We got plenty coming up. We just sort of broke down what the jury in Manhattan will not be allowed to hear with regard to election law from an election law expert. Coming up, though, at 8:05, you're going to hear from another election law expert, Hans von Spakovsky, who worked in the DOJ, specifically in the Civil Rights Division, pertaining to election law. He's been on commissions. By the time we're done with Hans von Spakovsky, you'll know more about election law than the jury in Manhattan will ever get to know as they decide whether the former president of the United States and now the leading candidate for president for the Republican Party broke election law. Think about that for a minute. You'll know more about election law than the jury about to decide whether Donald Trump is guilty of violating election law knows. That's coming up at 8:05. I'm Larry O'Connor with Julie Gunlock. Good morning, Julie.
Good morning.
Joining us, Cal Thomas. I'll throw it to you, Cal. Looks like the defense has rested, not able to put on an election law expert to discuss election law. Where is this trial heading, and what did you make of Michael Cohen's meltdown on the stand?
Well, Larry, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about law because you are a man who never breaks the law. I'll bet you never even speed. That's the kind of law abider you are. But given
I would
this
like
trial,
a moment to change my plea.
Yes, all right. Well, we'll take one from you. This thing has been a joke from the beginning. I mean, it is clear from the very beginning that Alvin Bragg and the guy who comes over from the Justice Department and the entire prosecution team are out to get Trump. You had Bragg running on a Get Trump campaign. You've had the Attorney General of New York promising to get Trump. Whatever your view of Trump, and this has nothing to do with Trump himself. This has to do with fairness. This has to do with the dog could come back to bite you someday if this kind of behavior is tolerated in a court of law in America. And I'm wondering if there's going to be a hung jury. Here's something that nobody's talking about. If there is a hung jury, and there ought to be, or at least there ought to be a unanimity and is not guilty because there's no real charge, then will they try him again to keep him off the campaign trail?
Jeez.
Will they spend millions more? And will they force Trump to spend who knows how much more with his defense lawyers? I wouldn't put it past them.
Cal, over the weekend, Joe Biden trying to shore up the black vote that he has been losing, according to the polls, in droves to Donald Trump. He appeared at the historically black college university Morehouse in Atlanta and said a lot about where our country is right now in race relations, including this.
You missed your high school graduation. You started college just as George Floyd was murdered. And there was a reckoning on race. It's natural to wonder if democracy you hear about actually works for you. What is democracy? If black men are being killed in the street, what is democracy? The trail of broken promises still leave black communities behind. What is democracy? You have to be 10 times better than anyone else to get a fair shot.
Cal Thomas, what does this tell you about the president's vision of the country that he's supposed to be leading?
Well, Larry, the Wall Street Journal, I thought, brilliantly summed it up in an editorial headline that said, "America hates you," speaking to African Americans. Look, Biden has got a history of racist remarks going back to 1977 when he said he didn't want forced busing to desegregate public schools because that would cause his children to, quote, grow up in a racial jungle. He keeps talking about democracy. We're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. There's a big difference. And as to the soundbite you just played, he says, what is democracy if black men are being killed in the street? Those streets are mostly in cities run by Democrat mayors, Democrat city councils, and Democrat district attorneys who are soft on crime. And most of the perpetrators are black men, sadly. He said, what is democracy if a trail of broken promises leaves black communities behind? Well, most of those promises were made by Democrats. We've spent over $11 trillion, according to the Heritage Foundation, on anti-poverty programs, most of it directed at poor and minority communities. We have done more with civil rights legislation to make up for the stain of slavery than any other country. I mean, what in the world is he talking about? He's losing younger black voters. He's losing younger Hispanic voters. But this is not a kind of speech that's going to win them back.
Yeah, and it's just so terrible to, you have these young kids, you know, they're about to graduate and launch into the world, and then he says this kind of divisive stuff, which essentially says that, you know, your life, you're going to work hard and no one will notice and no one cares because the color of your skin is just absolutely monstrous. But I wanted to get your opinion on what Pope Francis said last week. He criticized American conservatives, conservative Catholics, saying conservative is one who clings to something and does not want to see beyond that. Sounds awfully familiar, the word clinging, doesn't it?
Yeah, I remember Barack Obama said about religious people, conservative religious people, they get bitter, they cling to guns or religion or antipathy toward people who aren't like them. Negative, negative, negative. Yeah. Where is the city on the hill rhetoric of Ronald Reagan? You know, the Pope is a very, very liberal man, and I think that, you know, when he's saying American conservative Catholics are clinging to the past, well, the past is Scripture. The past is what is written 2,000 years ago. Yeah, I recall something the late columnist Joseph Sobrand said, who was a Catholic. I'd rather belong to a church that is 500 years behind the times and sublimely indifferent to change than I would to a church that's 5 minutes behind the times, huffing and puffing to catch up.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I guess we'll leave it there. That's a good line, though. I'm going to remember that one.
Good.
Cal, always good to talk to you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Cal.
Thank you.
It's 6:43, and Jen Psaki continues to sell this book. You know the book I'm talking about, Julie Gunlock, the one where she lied about Gold Star families.
Yes.
Saying that Joe Biden never checked his watch multiple times. That's a complete... Yeah, she's had to retract that. So before the book even hit the market, she had to retract part of it. She's like, did Kristi Noem edit this book? What's going on? And then, so she appeared at the downtown synagogue in D.C., where all of the liberals go and act very smart. In New York, it's the 92nd Street Y. It's the intellectual place to go and have conversations about all things liberal. And in talking about her book, she was asked, this is Jen Psaki, spokesperson for the White House, the Biden administration, hey, remember that time where you took some flack because it seemed like you were making fun of Space Force, right? which she did. She's a snot. She's snobby.
She is.
She's making fun of the military. Again, do you see a common thread here, by the way?
Right. She hates the military.
She hates the military. So here's her defense. This is why she was caught off guard with the question about Space Force, and it looked like she was making fun of and mocking Space Force.
The name, they're like hurt by the branding of the name. So let me just say that. That was what was going on in my head.
What would you call them?
I don't know, but Space Force is literally the name of a Steve Carell movie.
All right, okay.
Could we have done something different?
Can we have some sort of test for people who work in government or have a public profile that they don't sound like a 16-year-old girl on an Instagram reel?
Yeah. I know. But you want to explain this? Larry? That Space Force.
First of all, it wasn't a Steve Carell movie. It was a series, number one, on Netflix. And secondly, they created the series after the Space Force was created.
Right.
Space Force was a
TV show was named after the actual agency that was developed.
Right.
Not the reverse, Jen Psaki.
Right.
Not the reverse.
Donald Trump didn't watch a show on Netflix and say, that's a great idea.
I want that.
What is this documentary? That guy looks like Steve Carell. Well, let's do one of these things.
She's so stupid.
She also claims that Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin has targeted her.
And I became, because I was there when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, I became a prime target of the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin and their propaganda machine.
Explain what they did.
What they did is they, a lot of it was very gendered.
Of course.
They went after me and made up things I said that I never said.
That's right. They made up things that she said she never said,
kind of
unlike
like she did in her book.
Right.
Yeah, unlike her book and her job at the White House, where she made up things that she did say.
I mean,
don't make up things I didn't say. I'm the one who's responsible for making up things and then saying them.
Also, the Kremlin doesn't even know who she is. Okay, it's just the audacity, the absolute narcissism to think that Putin was like, that redhead, let's get her. Yes. I mean, and I love that. I love that it was very gendered. This is so 2024.
We must stop the peppermint patty. We must do whatever we can. Someone get Moose and Squirrel to take care of Peppermint Patty before she exposes the truth. It's 6:54.